Hey, welcome back to Pagitt Radio. And a conversation here with Kile Jones. And if you're a regular listener of the show, you know it's Christmas time, which means we like to talk with our atheist friends and chat about what it means to be a person of who doesn't hold to faith in the United States during a time when there's heightened, at least acceptability or public chiming in on religious sensibilities. So, Kyle, I was asking you before the break, how does someone of your views, an atheist who wants to be involved in interfaith dialogue and actually wants to create communities, because I want to ask you about that too, about the need for there being full atheist communities who do good things in the world and partner together and with community and share in each other's lives and do these kinds of good things. How do you respond to the lack of empathy that a lot of religious people just by default have, because they can't conceive of how people who don't believe in God could orient their lives, like to give meaning and purpose and all the rest of those things? Because for a lot of religious people, they may not buy all the facts, they may not buy all the arguments, they may not buy all the theology, but but at a core level, it's really important to me to know that God is and that God will do something about the world that I live in. So how do you and your clan respond to those kinds of inquiries, which I'm sure you get on a regular basis from people?
Oh yes, yeah. That's it's common for people to ask of atheists, how do you make sense out of the world? Where do you find meaning? And these more personal, more existential questions. And I think that they're, it's a very pertinent question. And I was asked it before, and on this interfaith panel, how do you find meaning in a world devoid of God, or a world in which there's just energy or matter in motion, and et cetera? And what the way that I put it, in the simplest way I could think of, was that I think for atheists and for atheists and unbelievers, meaning is not it does not have a capital M, and that's a lowercase m. So when we think of meaning, there's usually two different ways it's thought of. It's thought of as meaning with a lowercase m, that is that the meaning that I find subjectively through my experience with other people in this life, in this world that I share with. And then there's a large M, uppercase M, meaning that there's this meaning to the world or to the universe. There's this cosmic plan, or there's this teleology, there's this goal, and so we get confused sometimes when we mix those two understandings of meaning up. And so what I think is that, generally speaking, atheists don't believe in the meaning with the capital M. There's no kind of one reason or point or goal or purpose for the way that all this stardust is put together. But that doesn't mean that they don't experience life meaningfully. They have a lowercase m where, I find art meaningful. I find friendships meaningful. I find music meaningful. I find literature meaningful. I find, even portions of religious philosophy, portions of religious art, etc. I find these things very meaningful. When I look at the, pictures from the Hubble telescope, there's some kind of just awe and wonder and meaning that I have, or that I find, that is not the same as believing in an overarching purpose for all of life. So that's usually how I try to answer it. And so I think for atheists, the lowercase m becomes the larger case m. Since there's no meta-narrative, no grand purpose for everything, then all the focus on meaning in life comes down to that lowercase m.
So why is it, do you think? And you don't have to answer this for all atheists, of course, but it doesn't seem like atheists in our world have tended to organize as atheists in order to bring about lowercase meaning. Like, one would think, hey, if that's how people think about it, like I was telling a friend last night that I was going to be chatting with you on the show, and Her husband is someone who holds views very similar to yours, and I said, Casey might like this interview, so keep an eye out. And now I lost my track of thought because I was thinking about Casey for a second there.
It's the like atheist community.
Yes, yeah, and she said, hey, but she said, here's what I don't get. If my atheist friends think that this is all there is, you would think that they would be working harder to make this all that much better in the name of atheism. So like I can see why Christians and Muslims and Jews might say to themselves, hey, look, there's a grand agenda to all of this that God is really responsible for, and I don't have to take on all the burden of it, or stuff like that. They kind of there's a way to be a religious person and let yourself off the hook. But interestingly, religious people tend not to let themselves off the hook. They really think it matters in how one lives here, and we should make it better here. But I don't see a kind of coalescing and maybe I'm just missing it, which is sort of the rule of my life. But I don't see a kind of coalescing around atheist philosophy and talk and dialogue that says, look, this is all we got, so let's really make meaning out of this. Like let's really drive this thing home. First of all, am I right about that? And secondly, how come it doesn't happen more in the name of atheism?
Yeah, that's another pertinent question. Well, the answer to the former is that I don't really have a yes or a no that I can give you. I can say that compared to religious traditions and groups, the social cohesion, the factor of social cohesion amongst believers is much stronger than unbelievers. And so in that sense, you're correct. And the reasons for that are, I think, somewhat obvious. One being that a lot of these people were raised in church. They were, they went to every Sunday. They went to and then they're
sick of everybody. Yeah.
It's kind of like they don't want to repeat the same mistake that they found in organized religion. So they don't want to organize. They don't want to organize in the same way that religious people do, because they've either been hurt by it or traumatized by it, or they just have a disdain for organized anything, or in general. So there's that. And then there's another sense in which atheists don't want to feel compelled to go anywhere on Sunday or to go anywhere on a particular day. Yeah. I mean, it's like,
because I've heard that argument a lot, that critique of atheists. Like, look, they're just selfish people that don't want to play with other people, and they don't want to they don't want to do stuff, right? Like, they're a lot like religious people, but they're selfish. Have you not heard that kind of critique?
Like we're at the like lonesome corner of the sandbox.
That's right. Yeah, they're socially awkward people. I mean, that kind of thing. Like
drinking too much coffee.
Yeah.
I think they might be
sitting
smarter
alone
than the average bear. That's what I always thought.
Sitting around reading their literature and just not being good for anybody.
Kyle, I almost wonder if it wouldn't start to feel like another kind of capital M if atheists started to feel like, oh, now I have to organize and evangelize the world to my position. It would seem like in a community that's fought so hard to move away from this constant bombardment of having this meta-narrative put over your life, the capital M, whatever, that it might start to feel that way if you had to collectively organize and then go out and pitch that to everybody. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think there are some. Yeah, and there are groups that do this. It's usually the more militant of the atheists that meet more often, and that's another interesting kind of sociological insight. But so for instance, American Atheists Incorporated. I mean, that's the largest atheist group in America, and they spend tons of money putting up ads, putting up signs, billboards, having meetings in different cities, weekly meetings. I mean,
really?
American Atheists, just American Atheists and the American Humanist Association.
Yeah, I like those
These
guys.
Two, these two are they kind of spearhead this community building amongst non-believing communities. Now, there are plenty of other groups that do similar things, say on like meetup.com, for instance. If you go to meetup.com, any city, you're going to find like a atheist humanist group or a skeptical group. It may just be 5 or 6 people going to have coffee, or it may be
not just
30,
coordinating
40
rides to
people.
Comic-Con.
Doug has this idea that
I go again.
that there's a high percentage of atheists that are also like comic, sci-fi, fantasy geeks. Is
Super
this
nerds.
true? I don't.
I don't have a statistic to show that, and not only would that be a valuable piece of information, that would be a hilarious study. I mean, imagine going to your professor or whoever and saying, I want to do a study comparing kind of nerdishness with lack of belief.
Dude, I'm telling you, if evangelicalism is not so much, not only or even so much a theological category, but a sociological category, it's a culture. It feels to me an awful lot like my atheist friends, like the outspoken ones, the bumper sticker driving ones, right? The ones with bumper stickers in their back. And these are, I mean, I have good friends like this. That's also a particular cultural sensibility, and you know, they can quote Star Trek lines.
Yes, in this, you know, I mean, I got to be honest with you.
And I
as far as
shouldn't
my
be dismissive,
experience
but
is concerned, I agree. I mean, there are kind of these cultural trends in atheism and in unbelieving communities, as there are in any other subculture or subgroup of the population. So they have a certain flair, a certain taste that, you know, there's kind of a canon of sorts, like, okay, we're comfortable here.
Yeah.
We all know Carl Sagan. We all know, you know, Richard Dawkins. We all know, you know, this whole list of this litany of people. And so so let me just say that over the last 20 years, there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of atheist and unbelieving communities growing in America and in the UK. So they're on the rise, these communities, but they're certainly not as cohesive as denominations are, or as, you know, as most religious services are.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that seems to has struck me in the 20th century is and the 21st century was the loss of these secret societies, right? So and I'm sure you know about, you know, the Masons and these other groups where they were free thinker societies, right? So the reason you had groups like that in the 1800s was that the social cost for not being an adherent to religious belief was really high. So they would create little free thinker private secret societies where you could go to your meeting once a week or something, and you could talk about these ideas, and no one in the room would ever share who else was in the group. It was like early Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, right? Like they were secret, but they were free thinker societies. And they did lots of things, it seems like, and you'd sort of get recruited in maybe by somebody, and they would have, you know, rites and orders, and they'd have, you know, sometimes we would now talk about these as kind of silly elk club-like initiations, and those kinds of traditions have really trailed off, and they felt to me like the same kind of, like a corresponding group to denominations, right? So there was like a little hierarchy, there were rules to get in and out, and they kind of sat alongside of the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century or early 20th century expressions of this, of life in North America and Europe. And it feels like in the latter 20th century and the 21st century that there's a need for that kind of thing. And I want to advocate, and one of the things the things I'm excited about talking with you about is I think we need a better kind of atheism so that atheism can be a more viable choice for more people, because I think that's going to create better religious communities. I think if people don't have to default into religion just sort of because, you know, they want the benefits that come from it, but they could really think about atheism as a true option, and that's going to come through more than just rational arguments or deconstructive activity, which we've all gone through, but there's a wooing and a calling and a nurturing that goes on there, that would make a more even playing ground and a more even playground for these ideas to relate to one another. So I know that's a lot, but what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And once again, on this spectrum of atheism, it's tricky because you'll get the quote unquote more militant and then less militant on this spectrum. And what is usually put forward as a positive philosophy, not just so it's not just something with an A before it, is humanism. So generally, the more cordial or congenial towards religion will identify as something like humanist or secular humanist.
Yeah.
And so this humanist philosophy is not just, we don't believe in God. It's we believe in like the inherent worth or dignity of people. We believe in doing good works and good civic and social works and trying to fight poverty and trying to fight for women's rights and all of these political agendas. So so I think humanism has kind of taken that role where atheism just writ large has sort of failed in that manner. So you'll see a lot of humanist groups growing now, lots more humanist activity, and they'll be highly involved in social and political issues in their communities. So there's that, but then there are just your kind of common everyday coffee drinking, bumper sticker, Darwin fish having atheists, and they don't know. They're still in this space where they're figuring out, how do I express my atheism? Do I join a community? Do I stay kind of more on my own? And so there's this difficult cultural situation.
Okay, so let me raise this critique for you and see and hear your response to it. There are people who will critique the thrift store culture by saying you folks are just voyeuristic. What you do is you actually act as if you don't want to spend any money and you always get a deal, and you don't want to play by the rules of this oppressive capitalist system that makes kids in Bangladesh make clothes for you in a fire trap of a factory, and you're gonna take that sort of high road. But you go buy all your clothes from thrift stores that are funded and only exist because of that whole other system. And you're the 10% or the 12% of the people who are going to live off of the excesses of all of that and then act as if you're not part of that system. But you're only able to live your thrift store life because other people paid full price for that stuff, right? Okay, so this critique. And I hear that same, and I wonder what you think about that same critique of, look, you get to be an atheist in North American culture and maybe in parts of Europe because the religious system produces all this other activity and meaning, and you get to be raised in this kind of stuff and all these ethics, and then you get to sort of slide away and critique that system as like one of the elitist outsiders. But you really couldn't be doing that if it wasn't for the whole environment that's been created by the religious structure.
Yeah, that's
Is there anything to that, or is that just all guy trying to make sense out of it?
That's actually a good question. I've heard similar sentiments, and I think that usually I'm not exactly sure where I stand, but kind of the philosophy of history that a lot of atheists and quote unquote free thinkers have is that it was actually the rises of secular thought in classical liberalism in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, the Reformation, then Renaissance, then Scientific Revolution, then the Romantic era, etc. These secular moves of people like Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, that those laid the groundwork for our Constitution, which is generally secular,
Yes.
And so that it's actually the fruits of secularism that we are
nice.
benefiting from here, because for instance, not having a state church, not having our taxes taken to pay for that state church, not being coerced to go every week to one particular church, like for instance the Anglican Church in England or whatever state church you have connected. So we're not under compulsion to give 2 pence, Madison says, towards any other church, or any other denomination. And so these freedoms, the narrative that a lot of people hold in the unbelieving community is that these freedoms are birthed in juxtaposition to religious hegemony and control of the state, so that in that sense, like, secularism seems to be like Rocky, like secularism won, like
nice.
at the end for us. So there's that, but it's a lot more complicated than that, because in history a lot of these secular people were also religious.
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson, sure, total secularist, but also Unitarian. I mean, so it's not as simple as going, these good things come about because of secularism and these good things come about because of religion. It's a lot more complicated than that. So in my view, just as quick as I can, is there are good things that are birthed out of religion, and there are bad things that are birthed out of religion. There are good things that are birthed out of secularism, and there are bad things that are birthed out of secularism. So I don't know if the blame game is really a good way to go about, about furthering our dialogue, because, if I just go to all religious people, let's see, the Inquisition,
right?
The Crusades,
you just go down the list, right?
Like, it's just the same. It's the same sort of caricature, and it's like, well, they go, well, I'm a believer in 2012. I have no connection with, Peter the Hermit or some pope in the Middle Ages. So, in the same way, atheists being pictured as, kind of, I don't know, communist totalitarians or like anarchists, it doesn't really fit as it once did. So I think that, I think there's just an interesting dynamic. There's a propensity for good and bad, and to be birthed out of both. And so,
and I will tell you, I mean, it seems to me that if there were lessons taken from this presidential election, where the Romney crowd of political advisors were just absolutely misread the populace, and they totally discounted what was an obvious fact, was the shifts in the thinking of people in the United States and the willingness of certain demographics to participate in the political process, right? So I'm reading a couple of books on what happened to the Romney campaign, because I'm trying not to gloat. But anyway, it's obvious that there were things that, in the polling that the Romney campaign just said, we just don't believe that to be an accurate representation of the way things are going to turn out. And that's why their polling was wrong. And that's why, Romney thought until, 7 o'clock on November 6th that he was going to be the president of the United States. Just total denial of other facts. It seems to me that if that was the case in politics, that religious people are not properly seeing the demographic shift in North America of people toward atheism. It's being buffered a bit by immigrant populations that tend to have religious sensibilities, but of non-immigrant populations, people under the age of 30 are by default more aligning themselves with some kind of an agnosticism or atheism at a powerful rate, right? Like, it's almost everyone. In fact, even the religious people I know are like, I'm really on the fence between being a religious person of devotion and my assumptions about some kind of functional agnosticism, at least, or probably some kind of a functional atheism. It just seems to me that the trends are, and I know there's always that college age period where people stop believing in God and then something happens, right? Like it's just part of the developmental process of broader thinking and, neurological developments. But this isn't just that. This isn't the kid going off to college and saying, my mom and dad didn't know anything and there is no God and what's the purpose of life. It's a much deeper consideration going on. And I actually think that you and people who are doing the kind of work that you're doing are probably an indicator of these things more than an outlier. Do you think that's the case?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Oh, really? You think you're the future of American culture, do you? See, that's the problem with you atheists. You think you're all that. It was all just a big setup just to see if you think you're the bomb.
Oh yeah. That's obviously it, because that comes with the atheism.
That's right.
You're obviously
your God.
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously well, apparently you're nerdy, but I was gonna go with cool.
I didn't say that. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so I mean, there's this issue. I mean, so the rising trends in those who mark none under religious affiliation it's something that cannot be ignored. And so I think, since it grew exponentially in the 90s, the amount of nuns. So it's basically doubled in America.
Yeah.
It's doubled from, it was 7%, sometime in the mid 90s, and since then it's doubled. It's over double. It's more than doubled.
Yeah.
So that's a radical increase in those who mark none. Now, a lot of these people that mark none are not atheists.
Right.
So
right. They're just non-religiously affiliated. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them will be agnostic, but some of them will consider themselves spiritual. Spiritual but not religious. So they'll still hold to, they'll still believe in God, for instance. They'll just say, I don't want to associate myself with, Islam or with the Christian church or with whatever. So they'll mark none. And so we can't ignore that. And I think there's this cultural element that you're hinting at, where a lot of the youth now, the millennial generation, are very frustrated with the current, with what we inherited. And so what we inherited was this kind of stillborn of the religious right from 20 years ago. Yeah. And we look at this kind of civil religion as permeating all of American society, and we get frustrated. Like, we see our parents who say they're Christian and that marriage is sacred. We see them getting divorced more than unbelievers. We see hypocrisy in all of these huge leaders from Billy Graham to Falwell to you name it, and we see and don't get me started on George Bush. I mean, George Bush is enough to make a lot of people mark none. So there are all these different cultural reasons why I think this is happening, and you'll notice that churches, I go to theology school, as you did, and so you hear from people, religious leaders, going, yeah, what's happening like with the youth? Like they don't care as much, they don't want to come as much, the numbers are down, there's issues with money, people just don't care like they did or didn't have that same, they don't have that same enthusiasm that their parents had. And so I don't, there's a whole host of factors that play into that, but you're certainly right that it's something that we need to seriously consider and take a look at. But because now it's almost 20% basically. So a fifth of the population of America will identify as none. So it's still a high amount that mark Christian. So
right.
It's still very.
And I do think that those. I think that those surveys are asking just a different question than sometimes it feels to me like they ought to ask. I mean, someone's religious affiliation and someone's religious interest might not have any indication for their religious life or their belief in God. Because I know people who would highly affiliate with religion, but they don't believe in God. But they're like, but I'm a Presbyterian, or I'm a Baptist, or I'm a I'm a Lutheran, or whatever. But that has nothing to. It's just a different set of questions. And I know a lot of people who would.
It doesn't take into account cultural or nominal forms of Christianity.
Right. And that's one of the things I think is a big shift in our 21st century world, is that churches don't seem to own in most people's minds, a church doesn't own their affiliation or their belief in God. So they're just separate. Separate's probably low. They're just unrelated issues, one to the other, and I think that's really interesting. And I imagine you're seeing this in your interfaith work. Do you? Let me ask you one more question about that, and then we'll be sure to let you go, because I'm sure there's things you need to do today as well. Going around spreading. The kind of atheist propaganda that you do.
Goodwill and atheistic cheer.
Yeah. Making just taking
placing my red stickers everywhere with the star. And,
right, just asking nice kids who want to worship their Lord to
come over.
Yeah, to not believe anything anymore. And
watch Star Trek with me. And
hey.
Come to the dark side.
Hey. So how's it going in the interfaith dialogue world? Are you finding religious people to be open to conversations with atheists? Because as much as I know that there were atheists who found themselves to not think very highly sometimes of religious folks, it certainly goes the other way as well. There's a real cultural bigotry from religious people toward somebody who says they're an atheist. How's that going in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'd say the atheist and the unbeliever, I will give them this. They do start off with a cultural disadvantage.
Yeah.
For instance, 1 in 5 say none, but a small amount of those are actual atheists. So it's a very small percentage of the population that are atheists. So they already feel marginalized by the society around them. But on top of that, they're the least trusted group in America. So
isn't that interesting?
When Penny Edgell did this study at the university, I believe it's actually the University of Minnesota, I think. Yes, it is. And she's a sociologist, and she basically did this national study asking, after 9/11, asking which groups of American, subgroups in American society do you trust the most and which do you trust the less? They were by two different questions. One question was, which group has the closest view of American society as you, and which group would you most trust to marry your child?
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So on both of these, on this survey, the atheists rank highest on both of them as far as least trusted.
Really?
So they ranked at 43% and 40%, and then Muslims ranked at 32 or 30. So atheists are the least trusted people in America. So, to try, for instance, try running as a president in this country as an atheist. You won't get anywhere. People don't trust atheists, so we're already marginalized. We're already not trusted. And this is after 9/11, where people Muslims. And it turns out it's actually atheists that are at least. So anyway, yes, there are difficulties for atheists to do interfaith stuff because they just generally are frowned upon and viewed with suspicion, like, we're going to steal your kids and eat your babies and, I don't know, corrupt the youth of Athens, so there's already that.
And are you not?
I've found that the interfaith group or those who are involved in interfaith are already open enough to dialogue with people who totally disagree with them on religious matters. That already makes it conducive for atheists and humanists to join the conversation, because these particular religious leaders have already said, okay, I am a Christian pastor, this is a Muslim imam, we totally disagree about the divinity of Jesus, but let's sit down and talk and see what. So once they already have that, it's okay to talk to people that completely disagree with me. Then, and they're not going to infect me. Then, atheists, they can have a good home with people who are of that mindset, I think. But certainly, there's conflicts. And one thing I want to get across is this interfaith thing with atheists. It's not about upping each other at niceties. Like, I shake your hand and offer you coffee at this interfaith group more than you do to me, so that makes my tradition better, my beliefs better. Like, let's not delude ourselves into thinking that everybody agrees and everybody's the same. Like, we have genuine disagreements. But there's also a huge area where people can work together. So we may, the Christian pastor and the Muslim imam may go, yeah, we disagree about the divinity of Christ. But what we do agree about is that women should not be beaten by their husbands.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to me that there should even be a greater...
together on some, domestic violence thing. And so, yeah.
Well, and it seems to me there should even be and maybe this is what makes it harder for atheists, because it seems that there should be even a greater sense of connection between a Christian religious person and a professing atheist, because the chances of a professing Christian ever becoming a Muslim is pretty low, right? They're not going to do that. Yes. They're not going to shift in their whole cultural. But the chances
unless you're Cat Stevens.
Yeah, I love it. The chances of a Christian becoming a functional atheist, pretty high. And maybe that's why the fear is so great, right? You're most fearful of the one that you have the greatest potential of becoming like, that you wouldn't want to become like. But it seems like there should be more commonality there. And again, maybe it's the family squabble kind of theory that says, you fight deepest with those that you are actually most like, because at least for some people, the permanent or the temporary atheism is a pretty common thing. Like I have a friend that says, they say Jewish people get to call themselves Jewish. Like I'm a Jew, but I'm kind of Jewish. They say I'm kind of Christian-ish. There's a lot of people who are kind of atheist-ish, right? They're just they're kind of that, but not really, and they're sort of into it. And maybe that's what makes the dialogue with atheists so scary for people, is they think, if not for the grace of God, there go but I, kind of worries. Well, Kyle, thanks so much. Thanks for being a friend of the show, and we'd love to have you be our official atheist of Doug Pagitt Radio if you'd ever be open to that invitation. We have a Muslim, we have Jews, we have imams, we have rabbis, we have Christians, we have sidekicks, and we really need a Doug Pagitt Radio card-carrying atheist.
Sure, I would be glad to be your atheist anytime.
Our token atheist, if you know what I'm saying.
Thanks for being our atheist, Kyle.
Our atheist. All right, Kyle. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. I hope our paths cross soon now, because we don't have a chance in heaven. So we better make good. So we better make good now. All right, buddy. Okay. See ya.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right,
bye. Yeah, I like that guy. Yeah. We often end the show with a write on, and I was thinking this time that we don't. I don't know if we're gonna have much. I didn't want to come up. It just seems like in the struggle and the crisis of this last week in the North American rhythm, we should just go out with the song. Did you have a write on?
I have one.
You do? Okay, great.
I just thought of it.